The autumn rain drummed against the tall windows of Kensington Palace as Prince William stood in his private study, staring at the portrait of his late mother that hung above the mahogany desk. The phone in his hand had stopped ringing moments ago, but the echo of its shrill tone seemed to linger in the air like an unwelcome ghost. His personal protection officer, Detective Inspector James Crawford, stood quietly by the door, having delivered the message that would soon become all too familiar. "Your Royal Highness, Prince Harry is calling again." William's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. It had been 3 months since the explosive interview, 3 months since his younger brother had sat across from Oprah Winfrey and unleashed a torrent of accusations that had shaken the very foundations of the monarchy. The wounds were still fresh, still bleeding, and each phone call from Harry felt like salt being poured into an open gash. Crawford, a seasoned officer who had served the royal family for over 15 years, recognized the familiar tension that crept across the prince's shoulders whenever Harry's name was mentioned. It was Crawford who had first suggested the code, understanding that the constant interruptions and emotional toll of these calls were affecting not just William, but the entire household staff who witnessed the aftermath. "Implement Condition Blue," Williams said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of a decision that went far beyond simple protocol. The code was elegantly simple, yet profoundly significant. Condition Blue meant that Prince Harry's calls would be screened, filtered through a carefully constructed barrier that allowed William to maintain his sanity while still leaving a door open for genuine emergencies. It wasn't about cutting Harry off completely. It was about survival, about protecting what remained of William's ability to function as both a father and a future king. Crawford nodded and stepped out to brief the security team. Within minutes, a new protocol was in place throughout Kensington Palace. When Harry called, the staff would inform him that Prince William was unavailable, but would return his call when possible. The calls would be logged, their frequency monitored, and only those deemed urgent would be put through immediately. Catherine found her husband later that evening, standing in their children's playroom, watching George, Charlotte, and Louis build an elaborate castle from wooden blocks. The children's laughter filled the space, a stark contrast to the heavy silence that had been following William around the palace like a shadow. "They called it Condition Blue," William said without turning around, knowing his wife's footsteps as well as his own heartbeat. "Rather fitting, don't you think? Blue for the sadness that seems to follow every conversation with him now." Catherine moved to stand beside him, her hand finding his with the ease of nearly 2 decades of companionship. She had watched her husband struggle with the aftermath of Harry's public revelations, seen him replay conversations in his mind, wondering where things had gone so terribly wrong between the brothers who had once been inseparable. "Do you remember when we were children?" William continued, his voice barely above a whisper so as not to disturb the children. "After Mummy died, Harry used to have nightmares. Terrible ones that would wake the entire household. I would sneak into his room and tell him stories until he fell back asleep. I promised him I would always be there, that I would always protect him." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Now it was William who needed protection, from his own brother's words, from the constant barrage of accusations, and half-truths that seemed to flow from California like a poisoned river. The first test of Condition Blue came the very next morning. Harry called at precisely 7:30 a.m. London time, which meant it was 11:30 p.m. in California, a time when emotions ran high and judgment often ran low. Crawford intercepted the call, his voice professional and courteous as he explained that Prince William was in meetings and would return the call when available. "This is ridiculous, James," Harry's voice crackled through the phone, frustration evident even across the Atlantic. "I need to speak to my brother. It's about the children." Crawford had been briefed on this exact scenario. Harry often used the children, both his own and William's, as leverage to get through the protective barriers that had been erected. It was a manipulation tactic, perhaps unconscious, but effective nonetheless. "Understand, Your Royal Highness. I will pass along the message that you called regarding the children. Prince William will be informed immediately." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Crawford could hear muffled voices in the background, likely Meghan. coaching Harry on what to say next. It had become a pattern, these coach conversations that felt more like prepared statements than genuine attempts at reconciliation. Tell him it's about Archie's birthday. Tell him I want the cousins to be part of it, even if it's just a video call. Crawford dutifully recorded the message and promised to deliver it promptly. But as he hung up the phone, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't really about Archie's birthday at all. It was about control, about forcing William to engage on Harry's terms, at Harry's convenience. William received the message an hour later, during a brief break between his morning engagements. He stared at Crawford's neat handwriting on the message pad, feeling the familiar knot form in his stomach. Even something as innocent as a child's birthday had become a battlefield in the war between the brothers. "What's your assessment, James?" William asked, trusting the older man's judgment after years of faithful service. Crawford considered his words carefully. "In my opinion, sir, this feels like a test. Testing the boundaries of the new protocol. The urgency seems manufactured." William nodded slowly. Crawford's instincts were usually spot on, honed by years of dealing with security threats and family dynamics that were far more complex than any outsider could imagine. The detective inspector understood that sometimes the greatest threats came not from strangers with malicious intent, but from family members whose love had been twisted into something unrecognizable. The day continued with a series of official engagements: a visit to a children's hospital, a meeting with environmental activists, a brief stop at a veterans charity. Through it all, William carried the weight of Harry's message, turning it over in his mind like a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. That evening, as Catherine tucked the children into bed, William made his decision. He would call Harry back, but on his own terms, when he felt emotionally prepared for whatever conversation awaited him. Condition Blue wasn't about avoiding his brother entirely. It was about creating space for William to be the father, husband, and future king that his family and his country needed him to be. The call came at 9 p.m. London time. Harry answered on the first ring, his voice carrying a mixture of relief and barely contained frustration. "William, finally. I was beginning to think you were avoiding me." "I'm not avoiding you, Harry. I'm protecting myself and my family. There's a difference." The words hung in the air between them, separated by thousands of miles and what felt like an unbridgeable chasm of hurt and misunderstanding. William could hear the sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, could almost see his brother's face contorting with the familiar expression of someone who felt perpetually misunderstood. "Protecting yourself? From me? I'm your brother, William. I'm not the enemy here. Aren't you?" The question slipped out before William could stop it. Years of accumulated pain and betrayal condensed into two simple words. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, ready to snap at any moment. In the background, William could hear the distant sounds of California evening. Traffic, maybe the sound of waves if Harry was near the ocean. It was a world away from the quiet dignity of Kensington Palace, from the weight of tradition and duty that had shaped William's entire existence. "I never wanted to be your enemy," Harry said finally, his voice small and lost. "I just wanted to be heard. I wanted someone to acknowledge what happened to us, what we went through. And you thought the best way to do that was to air our family's private business on international television? To make accusations you knew would hurt not just me, but Catherine, the children, even our grandmother?" William could feel his carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. This was exactly why Condition Blue existed, to prevent these conversations from happening when he wasn't emotionally equipped to handle them. "You don't understand the pressure we were under," Harry continued, his voice growing stronger, more defensive. "Meghan was being destroyed by the press, and nobody in the family was doing anything to help. We were drowning, William. We were drowning, and you all just watched." The accusation hit William like a physical blow. He had tried to help, had tried to guide Harry through the complexities of royal life, just as he himself had been guided. But Harry had always been different, always chafed against the restrictions and protocols that William had learned to navigate with careful precision. "I try to help you," William said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside him. "But you wouldn't listen. You wanted to do things your way, consequences be damned. My way? You mean the way that didn't involve bowing and scraping to a system that's fundamentally broken? The way that didn't involve pretending everything was fine when it clearly wasn't? There it was, the fundamental difference between them laid bare. William, who had accepted his destiny and found a way to work within the system to create change. Harry, who had rejected it all and chosen to burn bridges rather than build them. The system isn't perfect, Harry, but it's ours to improve, not destroy. You gave up on it. You gave up on us. I gave up. Harry's voice rose, the careful control finally slipping. I tried to make it work for 8 years, William. 8 years of being told to smile and wave while my wife was being torn apart by the same people who destroyed our mother. I didn't give up. I was pushed out. William closed his eyes, feeling the familiar weight of their mother's memory settling over the conversation like a dark cloud. Diana's death had shaped both brothers, but in fundamentally different ways. William had learned to be cautious, to protect himself and his family from the glare of public scrutiny. Harry had learned to fight, to push back against a system he saw as inherently destructive. Mummy wouldn't have wanted this, William said quietly. She wouldn't have wanted us to be enemies. No, Harry agreed, his voice thick with emotion. She would have wanted us to take care of each other. But we've forgotten how to do that, haven't we? The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, circling around the same hurt feelings and misunderstandings that had driven them apart. When William finally hung up the phone, he felt emotionally drained, hollowed out like an old tree that looked strong from the outside but was rotting at its core. Catherine found him later that night, sitting alone in his study, staring at nothing. She didn't say anything, just curled up in the chair beside him and took his hand in hers. Sometimes, she knew, there were no words that could heal the kind of wounds that family inflicted on each other. Did Condition Blue work? She asked eventually. William considered the question. The call had still been difficult, still left him feeling raw and exposed. But he had been able to choose when to have the conversation, had been able to prepare himself mentally and emotionally for the onslaught of accusations and hurt feelings. It helped, he said finally. It gave me time to remember who I am before I had to remember who we used to be. Outside, the autumn rain continued to fall, washing the streets of London clean while inside Kensington Palace. A future king grappled with the reality that sometimes loving someone meant protecting yourself from them. Condition Blue wasn't just a security protocol. It was a survival mechanism, a way to preserve what remained of two brothers who had once promised to take care of each other forever. The next morning would bring new challenges, new calls to screen, new decisions about when and how to engage with a brother who felt more like a stranger with each passing day. But for now, William allowed himself to grieve for what they had lost, while holding on to the hope that somehow, someday, they might find their way back to each other. The portrait of Diana watched over it all, her smile forever frozen in time, unaware of the battle being fought in her memory by the sons she had loved more than life itself. 3 weeks had passed since the implementation of Condition Blue, and the protocol had become as natural as breathing for the staff at Kensington Palace. Detective Inspector Crawford had perfected the art of diplomatic deflection, while the household had learned to recognize the subtle shift in atmosphere whenever Harry's name appeared on the caller ID. But it was the call that came on a Tuesday morning in November that would test the limits of William's carefully constructed barriers. Catherine was in the nursery with Lewis, helping him practice his letters, when her phone buzzed with an urgent message from Crawford. Condition Blue escalation. Please advise HRH immediately. The formal language couldn't mask the underlying tension. Something had changed in the delicate dance between the brothers. She found William in the garden, despite the crisp autumn air, throwing a tennis ball for their spaniel, Orla. The repetitive motion seemed to calm him, much the way his grandmother found peace in her horses or his father in his gardens. It was a coping mechanism he'd developed during the worst days following Harry's departure from royal duties, when every newspaper headline felt like a fresh betrayal. Harry's been calling every hour since 5 this morning, Catherine said quietly, not wanting to startle him from his meditation. Crawford says he sounds different. Desperate, maybe even frightened. William's hand stilled on the tennis ball. Orla waited patiently at his feet, tail wagging, unaware of the human drama unfolding around her. In the distance, they could hear the sounds of London waking up, traffic building, the first tourists gathering outside the palace gates. Life continuing its relentless march forward while the Windsor family remained trapped in patterns of pain that seemed to repeat themselves with each generation. Different how? William asked, though part of him didn't want to know the answer. Crawford thinks there might be something genuinely wrong. Not just another attempt to manipulate a conversation, but actual trouble. The word trouble sent a chill through William that had nothing to do with the November air. Despite everything that had happened between them, despite the hurt and anger and public humiliation, Harry was still his little brother. The same little brother who had hidden behind William's legs at their mother's funeral, who had looked to him for guidance through the nightmare of growing up in the public eye, who had once trusted him with secrets and fears and dreams for the future. What kind of trouble? William found himself asking, though he suspected he already knew. Catherine's silence was answer enough. They both knew about the struggles Harry had faced with his mental health, the battles with depression and anxiety that had nearly consumed him before he'd found help. They knew about the drinking, the reckless behavior, the desperate attempts to fill a void that their mother's death had carved out of his soul 25 years earlier. He mentioned Meghan in one of the messages. Catherine continued carefully. Said she was in the hospital. The tennis ball dropped from William's hand, bouncing once before Orla pounced on it with enthusiastic determination. If Meghan was in the hospital, if something was genuinely wrong with Harry's wife, then Condition Blue might be preventing a real emergency from getting through. The irony was bitter. The very protocol designed to protect William from manipulation might be blocking legitimate cries for help. "I need to hear the messages," William said, already walking back toward the palace. Crawford was waiting in William's private office, a collection of message slips arranged on the desk like evidence in a criminal case. Each one was time-stamped. Each one showed the progression of Harry's emotional state as the morning had worn on. 5:15 a.m. Need to speak to William urgently. Family matter. 5:47 a.m. This is important. Please have him call me back immediately. 6:23 a.m. Meghan is in the hospital. I need my brother. 7:01 a.m. Why is he doing this to me? I just need someone to talk to. 7:38 a.m. Please. I'm begging you. Just let me talk to him. 8:15 a.m. I know about Condition Blue. I know what you're all doing. But this is real, William. This is real. The final message hit William like a physical blow. Harry knew about the protocol. Somehow he had discovered the code name, had figured out that his calls were being systematically screened and filtered. The knowledge that Harry was aware of the barriers being erected against him added another layer of complexity to an already impossible situation. How could he know? William asked, sinking into his desk chair. Crawford shifted uncomfortably. There are several possibilities, sir. Palace staff talk, despite all our precautions. Or perhaps someone in his California circle has connections to British security services. It's also possible he simply deduced it from the pattern of responses he's been receiving. William stared at the messages, tried to read between the lines, trying to separate genuine crisis from emotional manipulation. Harry had always been skilled at blurring those boundaries, and making his pain everyone else's emergency. But what if this time was different? What if this time the boy who had cried wolf was actually facing real wolves? Get him on the phone, William decided. Now. Harry answered before the first ring had finished, his voice hoarse and strained. William? Jesus, finally. I've been trying to reach you for hours. I know. I got your messages. What's happening with Meghan? There was a pause, filled with the sound of Harry's ragged breathing. In the background, William could hear unfamiliar voices, the beeping of medical equipment, the sterile acoustic signature of a hospital environment. She collapsed yesterday evening, Harry said, his words tumbling over each other in their urgency to be heard. Just collapsed in the kitchen while she was making dinner for Archie. We rushed her to Cedars-Sinai, and the doctors, they're running tests, but they don't know what caused it. Her blood pressure was through the roof, and she's been having these headaches for weeks. William felt his chest tighten. Whatever else existed between him and Harry, whatever bitter words had been exchanged, Megan was still the mother of his nephew. She was still family. However complicated that relationship had become. "Is she stable now?" William asked, pushing aside his own emotions to focus on the immediate crisis. "Physically, yes. But, William, she keeps asking for you. Both of you. She keeps saying she never wanted things to end up like this, that she misses Catherine, that she wishes the children could know each other properly." The words hit William harder than any accusation Harry had ever made. In all the public battles and private recriminations, it was easy to forget that Megan had once been welcomed into the family with genuine warmth. Catherine had spent hours with her, shopping for her wedding dress, helping her understand the protocols and expectations of royal life. There had been laughter, shared confidences, the promise of sisterhood that had crumbled under the weight of media pressure and cultural misunderstandings. "What do the doctors think caused the collapse?" William asked, trying to maintain his composure while processing this new information. "Stress. Chronic stress and exhaustion. She's been pushing herself too hard with work, trying to prove she can succeed outside the royal system. But it's been eating her alive, William. The constant criticism, the lawsuits, the feeling that she destroyed our family by simply existing." William closed his eyes, recognizing the familiar pattern. Harry was drawing him in, using Megan's genuine medical crisis to relitigate old grievances and assign blame for their fractured relationships. It was classic Harry, mixing legitimate concerns with emotional manipulation until it became impossible to separate one from the other. "I'm sorry she's going through this," William said carefully. "But I'm not sure what you want from me, Harry. You've made it very clear that you don't want or need our support." "That's not true." Harry's voice cracked with emotion. "I never said that. I said I couldn't accept the conditions that came with your support. There's a difference." The distinction was lost on William, who had spent months trying to understand exactly what Harry expected from their relationship. Every attempt at reconciliation seemed to come with impossible demands: acknowledge wrongdoing, apologize publicly, restructure centuries of tradition to accommodate Harry's vision of modern monarchy. "Tell me what you need," William said finally, deciding to focus on the immediate crisis rather than rehashing old arguments. "I need you to call her," Harry said, his voice small and vulnerable in a way that transported William back 25 years to a frightened 10-year-old who had just lost his mother. "Just talk to her for a few minutes. Let her know that whatever happened between us, she's still welcome in the family. She needs to hear it from you, not from me." The request was simultaneously simple and impossibly complex. A phone call to a sister-in-law in the hospital should have been automatic, a basic human gesture that transcended political considerations. But in their world, nothing was ever simple. Every conversation was scrutinized, every gesture analyzed for hidden meanings and political implications. "Harry," William began, then stopped, unsure how to articulate the complex web of considerations that surrounded even this basic act of compassion. "Please," Harry whispered. "She's asking for Catherine too. She misses having female family members she can talk to. She's isolated here, William. More isolated than I think either of us realized." William found himself thinking about Catherine, about how she had struggled in her early years as a royal, about the support system that had helped her find her place within the institution. Megan had been denied that same gradual integration, thrust into the spotlight before she'd had time to understand the rules of the game she was now playing. "I'll call the hospital," William decided. "But, Harry, this doesn't fix everything between us. This doesn't erase what's happened." "I know," Harry said, relief evident in his voice. "I'm not asking for that. I'm just asking for you to be my brother for 10 minutes. Can you do that?" The conversation with Megan was brief, but emotional. She sounded fragile, her usual confidence replaced by vulnerability that reminded William of their early meetings, before the media pressure and family tensions had hardened her into someone he barely recognized. She thanked him for calling, apologized for the pain their departure had caused the family, and expressed hope that somehow, someday, the children might know each other properly. Catherine spoke to her too, their conversation lasting nearly an hour as two mothers connected over shared experiences of public scrutiny and private struggles. When Catherine finally hung up, her eyes were red with tears she'd been holding back for months. "She's not the villain in this story," Catherine said quietly. "She's just a woman who got caught up in something bigger than herself and didn't know how to handle it." William nodded, feeling the weight of missed opportunities and failed communications settling over him like a familiar blanket. How many of their problems could have been avoided with better understanding, with more patience, with the kind of unconditional support that families were supposed to provide each other? That evening, as William tucked his children into bed, George asked an innocent question that cut straight to the heart of everything that had been troubling his father. "Daddy, why don't we see Uncle Harry anymore?" William paused in the middle of reading a bedtime story, looking down at his eldest son's earnest face. How could he explain that sometimes families fell apart, not because of any single dramatic event, but because of accumulated misunderstandings and hurt feelings that built up over time like sediment in a river, eventually creating barriers that seemed impossible to cross? "Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements that are hard to fix," William said carefully. "But that doesn't mean we stop loving each other. Could you fix it if you tried really hard?" George pressed, with the simple faith of a child who believed all problems had solutions if adults would just make the effort. William thought about Condition Blue, about the elaborate system he'd constructed to protect himself from his brother's pain. He thought about Harry, sitting alone in a California hospital, watching his wife recover from a collapse brought on by stress and isolation. He thought about their mother, who had always believed that love could conquer any obstacle if people were brave enough to be vulnerable with each other. "Maybe," he told his son, "maybe if we all tried really hard." Later that night, William sat in his study, staring at his phone. Harry's number was right there, stored under H with a crown emoji that had been there since Harry's wedding day. One call could bridge the gap between them, could begin the long process of rebuilding what they had lost. But it could also open floodgates that William wasn't sure he was strong enough to handle. Condition Blue had given him space to breathe, time to heal, protection from the constant emotional demands that had been overwhelming him. But it had also isolated him from genuine moments of connection, from opportunities to be the brother that Harry needed him to be. As he debated whether to make the call, William's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown California number. But he recognized the sender immediately from the message content. "Thank you for calling Meg today." It meant everything to her. And to me. Each second message followed quickly. "I know I've messed up a lot of things, but I never stopped loving you. I never stopped needing my big brother." William stared at the messages until the screen went dark, his reflection staring back at him in the blank display. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions about how to balance protection with connection, how to maintain boundaries while leaving room for healing. But tonight, for the first time in months, he allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, love might be stronger than pride after all. Outside, London settled into evening quiet, while inside Kensington Palace, a future king wrestled with the eternal question of how to love someone who had hurt you, how to forgive someone who might hurt you again, and how to be a brother when being a brother felt like the most dangerous thing in the world. Christmas was 3 weeks away when the letter arrived, delivered not through official channels, but by a private courier who waited patiently in the December cold while Detective Inspector Crawford verified its authenticity. The envelope bore Harry's familiar handwriting, slightly messier than it used to be, as if his hands had forgotten the careful penmanship drilled into him by palace tutors decades earlier. William found Crawford waiting in the morning room, the letter lying unopened on a silver tray between them, like an unexploded device that might detonate at any moment. Since Meghan's hospitalization 6 weeks earlier, Condition Blue had evolved into something more nuanced than simple avoidance. Harry's calls were still screened, but genuine emergencies were handled with more sensitivity, more consideration for the human cost of their fractured relationship. "It came with this," Crawford said, placing a smaller envelope beside the first. "Addressed to Master George." William's stomach clenched. Harry was reaching out to his children now, bypassing the adults entirely in his attempt to maintain family connections. It was either a desperate act of love or a calculated manipulation, and William found himself unable to distinguish between the two anymore. He opened his own letter first, unfolding several pages of Harry's careful script. The handwriting transported him instantly back to childhood, to shared homework sessions, and secret notes passed between them during boring state functions. Before everything had become so complicated, when they had been simply two brothers navigating an extraordinary childhood together. "William," the letter began, "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, especially not like this. But I've been thinking about what Megan said in the hospital about how we used to be before everything went wrong. I've been thinking about Mummy and what she would say if she could see us now." William had a pause, his throat tightening with unexpected emotion. Their mother had always been the bridge between them, the one who could smooth over their differences and remind them that they were better together than apart. Diana had understood both sons in ways that no one else ever had. William's deep sense of duty and Harry's rebellious spirit, the way they complemented each other when they weren't tearing each other apart. "I know I've made mistakes," the letter continued. "I know I've hurt you and Catherine and the children, and I know saying sorry doesn't fix everything I've broken. But I need you to understand that I never meant for things to get this bad between us. I was angry and hurt, and I said things that I can't take back. Things that probably shouldn't have been said in public, no matter how true they felt to me at the time." William set the letter down for a moment, staring out at the palace gardens where his children often played. George would be 9 soon, old enough to start understanding the weight that would someday rest on his shoulders. Charlotte was 6, brilliant and spirited in ways that reminded William painfully of both Harry and their mother. Louis, at 3, was still blissfully unaware of the family drama swirling around him. The letter continued for several more pages, detailing Harry's struggles in California, his attempts to build a new life while carrying the wounds of his old one. He wrote about therapy, about finally beginning to understand the ways that trauma had shaped his reactions to stress and conflict. He wrote about fatherhood, about watching Archie grow up without knowing his British cousins, about the loneliness of raising children so far from family. But it was the final paragraph that broke William's carefully maintained composure. "I dream about her sometimes," Harry had written, "about Mummy. She's always disappointed in us, William. Always asking why we can't take care of each other the way she taught us to. I wake up feeling like I've failed her all over again, like I've failed you, like I've failed everyone who ever believed I could be better than this." William's hands were shaking as he reached for the second envelope, the one addressed to George. Inside was a simple Christmas card with a picture of Archie and Lilibet, both children grinning at the camera with the unconscious joy of early childhood. Harry's message to his nephew was brief, but heartfelt. "Dear George, I hope you have the best Christmas ever. I miss you and Charlotte and Louis so much. Love, Uncle Harry." There was also a small gift, a wooden toy plane that looked handmade, probably crafted by Harry himself during the long California evenings when homesickness became too much to bear. It was the kind of simple, thoughtful present that the Harry of old would have given, before publicity and protocol had complicated every gesture. Catherine found William an hour later, still sitting with the letters spread before him like pieces of a puzzle he couldn't solve. She didn't say anything at first, just sat down beside him and waited for him to speak. 20 years of marriage had taught her when to push and when to simply be present. "He wants to come home for Christmas," William said finally. "Not to stay, just for a few days. He wants the children to meet each other properly. Wants to try to rebuild something from what's left of our relationship." Catherine picked up George's card, studying the photograph of her niece and nephew. Lilibet looked so much like Charlotte at that age, the same stubborn chin and mischievous eyes. Archie had Harry's smile, but William's serious expression, as if he already understood that he was caught between two worlds that couldn't seem to coexist peacefully. "What does your gut tell you?" Catherine asked, setting the card down carefully. William laughed, but there was no humor in it. "My gut tells me about 50 different things, most of them contradictory. Part of me wants to say yes, wants to believe that we can fix this. Another part of me is terrified that letting him back and will just give him another opportunity to hurt us all. It was the central dilemma that had haunted William for months. How do you love someone who has caused you tremendous pain? How do you protect your family while still leaving room for forgiveness? How do you rebuild trust with someone who has already broken it so thoroughly? Maybe that's the wrong question, Catherine suggested gently. Maybe instead of asking whether he'll hurt us again, we should ask whether we can survive it if he does. The observation was characteristically insightful, cutting through William's defensive calculations to reach the heart of his fears. He wasn't just afraid of Harry hurting him again. He was afraid that he wasn't strong enough to handle another betrayal, another round of public accusations, and private wounds. I keep thinking about what George asked me, William admitted, about whether we could fix things if we tried hard enough. What if he's right? What if the solution really is that simple, and we're just too proud and stubborn to see it? Catherine reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over the years. Pride and stubbornness run in your family, she said with a small smile. But so does love, so does loyalty, so does the ability to forgive when it really matters. That afternoon, William called an emergency meeting with his senior staff. Detective Inspector Crawford, Private Secretary Simon Case, and Communications Secretary Lee Thompson gathered in the secure briefing room to discuss what William was already thinking of as the Harry problem. If he comes back for Christmas, even briefly, it changes everything, Thompson warned. The media will go insane. Every photographer in London will be camped outside the palace gates. Every word, every gesture, every family interaction will be analyzed and reanalyzed until it loses all meaning. Crawford nodded grimly. From a security standpoint, we need to significantly increase protocols, not just for physical protection, but for information security. There are too many people who would pay substantial sums for inside information about a Harry-William reunion. Simon Case, ever the diplomat, tried to find middle ground. Perhaps there's a way to manage this that protects everyone involved. A private family gathering, very limited public acknowledgement, careful control of the narrative. But William was already shaking his head. If we do this, we do it properly. No half measures, no political calculations. If Harry comes home for Christmas, it's because he's family, not because it's good PR. The room fell silent as the implications of his words sank in. William was talking about making a decision based purely on personal considerations, setting aside the careful political calculations that usually governed royal family interactions. It was either remarkably brave or remarkably foolish, and possibly both. Sir, Crawford said carefully, have you considered the possibility that this is exactly what Prince Harry is hoping for? That he's using your love for him to manipulate a situation to his advantage? The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire that everyone could smell, but no one could locate. It was the question that had haunted every interaction between the brothers for months. Where did genuine emotion end and strategic manipulation begin? Of course I've considered it, William replied. But I've also considered what happens if I'm wrong. What happens if my brother is genuinely trying to come home, and I reject him because I'm too paranoid to trust him. That evening, William walked alone through the palace gardens, following paths he'd known since childhood. The winter air was sharp and clean, and the bare trees stood like sentinels against the gray sky. Somewhere in California, Harry was probably starting his day, probably wondering whether his letter had been received, probably hoping against hope that his brother might find a way to forgive him. The decision, when it came, felt both inevitable and terrifying. William found himself thinking about their mother's funeral, about the way Harry had reached for his hand during the worst moments, about the promise they had made to each other to always be there when it mattered most. They had broken that promise spectacularly over the past few years, but perhaps it wasn't too late to try to honor it again. He called Harry from his personal phone, not through official channels or security protocols, just a brother calling his brother on a cold December evening. Harry answered on the second ring, his voice tentative and hopeful. "William, I got your letter," William said simply. There was a long pause, filled with 3,000 miles of history and hurt and love that had never really died despite everything that had tried to kill it. "And?" Harry asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Come home for Christmas," William said, the words coming out in a rush before he could change his mind. "Bring Megan and the children. Let's see if we can remember how to be a family again." The sound that came from Harry's end of the line might have been a sob or a laugh, or both. "Are you sure? Because if you're just going to change your mind again, if this is some kind of test that I'm going to fail, I'm sure," William interrupted, surprised to find that he actually was. "I'm scared, and I'm angry, and I don't trust you completely yet. But I'm sure. You're my brother, Harry. That has to mean something." "It means everything," Harry whispered. "It means everything, William." After they hung up, William sat in the growing darkness, wondering what he had just committed himself and his family to. Condition Blue would have to be suspended, at least temporarily. The carefully constructed barriers would have to come down, and with them would come all the vulnerability and risk that William had been trying so hard to avoid. But perhaps that was the point. Perhaps love, real love, was supposed to be risky. Perhaps the safety he had been trying to create was just another kind of prison, one that protected him from pain, but also cut him off from possibility. 3 weeks until Christmas. 3 weeks to prepare for a reunion that might heal their family or destroy what little remained of their relationship. 3 weeks to discover whether blood really was thicker than water, whether forgiveness was stronger than pride, whether two brothers who had lost their way might still find their way back to each other. In the distance, the lights of London twinkled like stars, and William allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, this Christmas might be different from all the others. Christmas Eve arrived with an unseasonable warmth that seemed to mirror the tentative thaw in the relationship between the two brothers. Harry, Meghan, and their children had arrived at Heathrow 3 days earlier, slipping through private terminals under the heaviest security blanket the Royal Protection Unit had arranged in years. The media frenzy had been exactly as predicted. Intense, overwhelming, and largely speculative, since the family had managed to maintain complete privacy around the actual reunion. William stood at the window of his private sitting room, watching his children play in the garden with their cousins. George was teaching Archie how to properly kick a football, while Charlotte had taken charge of 3-year-old Lilibet, showing her the secret paths through the palace gardens that had been known to royal children for generations. Louis, overwhelmed by having so many new playmates, had attached himself to Harry with the single-minded devotion that only very small children can manage. The scene should have filled William with pure joy, but instead he felt the familiar knot of anxiety that had taken up permanent residence in his chest over the past year. 3 days of careful politeness, of walking on eggshells, of everyone trying so hard to be normal that nothing felt normal at all. The children had adapted quickly, as children do, but the adults remained trapped in patterns of hurt and wariness that seemed impossible to break. Detective Inspector Crawford appeared at his elbow, speaking in the low tones reserved for sensitive communications. "Your Royal Highness, we've had another media breach attempt." Photographer with a long lens positioned in the park across from the main gates. "We've removed him, but there will be others." William nodded absently, his attention focused on Harry, who was pushing Lilibet on the swing set with an expression of such pure contentment that it was almost painful to witness. This was the Harry that William remembered from their childhood, gentle with smaller children, patient with their questions, instinctively protective of those who needed care. It was easy to forget, in the midst of all their adult complications, that at his core Harry remained the same person who had once spent hours teaching William how to build the perfect snowman. "Sir," Crawford continued, "there's something else. We've intercepted several communications suggesting that Prince Harry's location has been compromised by someone with inside access. Someone in California is feeding information to British tabloids about his movements and conversations." The betrayal hit William like a physical blow, though he wasn't sure why he was surprised. Harry's circle in California had always seemed fluid, filled with people who appeared more interested in proximity to fame than genuine friendship. The idea that someone was monetizing Harry's most vulnerable moments felt like a violation that went beyond ordinary gossip. "Does he know?" William asked. "Not yet. We thought you might want to be the one to tell him." William watched his brother lift Lilibet from the swing, spinning her around while she giggled with delight. How could he destroy that moment of simple happiness with news of another betrayal? How could he explain that even here, even in what should be the safety of family, Harry wasn't truly protected? The conversation came that evening, after the children had been put to bed and the adults had gathered in the small family dining room that Diana had loved best. It was Catherine who broached the subject, her natural diplomacy allowing her to navigate the minefield of hurt feelings that still lay between the brothers. "We need to talk about security," she said gently, setting down her teacup with deliberate care. "Not just physical security, but information security. There are people in your California circle who are selling stories about you to British media." Meghan's face went pale, her hand instinctively moving to cover Harry's. "Who? Do you know who?" William found himself studying his sister-in-law with new eyes. The woman sitting across from him looked nothing like the confident actress who had walked down the aisle at St. George's Chapel 4 years earlier. Her face was thinner, marked by stress lines that hadn't been there during their early acquaintance. Her clothes, while still expensive, hung slightly loose on her frame, as if she had lost weight without noticing. Most telling of all, she kept glancing at Harry with an expression of barely concealed anxiety, as if she feared he might disappear at any moment. "We have suspicions," William replied carefully, "but nothing definitive yet. The important thing is that you both understand the scope of the problem. Someone very close to you is betraying your trust for money." Harry's laugh was bitter, devoid of any real humor. "Why does this keep happening to us? Why can't we trust anyone?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of years of disappointment and betrayal. William thought about their childhood, about the servants who had sold stories about their private moments, about friends who had revealed secrets for their 15 minutes of fame, about the endless parade of people who had seen their proximity to royalty as a path to personal profit. "Because we're valuable commodities," William said finally. "Because our pain and our joy and our private moments are worth money to people who don't see us as human beings." Meghan was crying now, quiet tears that she kept trying to wipe away before anyone noticed. "I thought it would be different in America. I thought we could control our own narrative, protect our own privacy." Catherine reached across the table to touch Meghan's hand, a gesture of comfort that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. "Privacy is an illusion for people like us. The best we can do is choose who we trust and hope we choose wisely." The conversation continued late into the night, moving from practical security concerns to deeper issues of trust and betrayal that had plagued both brothers their entire lives. They talked about their mother, about the way her death had taught them that the people they loved most could be taken away without warning. They talked about the burden of public expectation, about the way every mistake was magnified and every success was diminished. Most importantly, they talked about the ways they had failed each other, the moments when fear and pride had prevented them from being the brothers they had promised to be. "I was so angry when you left," William admitted as the fire burned low in the grate. "Not just disappointed or hurt, but genuinely furious. It felt like you were abandoning everything we had been taught to value, everything Mummy and Papa had sacrificed to prepare us for." Harry nodded slowly. "I know, and I was angry that you couldn't understand why I had to go. Why staying was killing me, killing Meghan, killing any chance we had of happiness. I think," Catherine said carefully, "that you were both right, and you were both wrong. William, the institution does need to change to evolve with the times. And Harry, change from within is often more effective than change from without." Meghan looked up from her tea, her eyes still red, but her voice steady. "Maybe the answer isn't choosing sides. Maybe the answer is finding ways to support each other, even when we make different choices." It was a simple observation, but it cut through months of complex arguments and hurt feelings to reach something fundamental. They didn't have to agree on everything to love each other. They didn't have to make the same choices to respect each other's decisions. The next morning was Christmas Day, and the palace buzzed with the controlled chaos of a large family celebration. The children were up early, tearing through presents with the enthusiasm that only Christmas morning can inspire. George proudly showed Archie his new books, while Charlotte and Lilibet collaborated on an elaborate tea party for their dolls. Louis, overwhelmed by the excitement, had claimed Harry's lap as his personal throne and refused to be dislodged. William watched his brother with their children and felt something shift in his chest, some knot of tension finally beginning to loosen. This was what family was supposed to look like, messy and loud and full of unconditional love. This was what their mother had always wanted for them. "Uncle William," Archie said shyly, approaching with a carefully wrapped package. "I made this for you." Inside was a drawing, clearly the work of a 4-year-old, but executed with serious concentration. It showed two stick figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun, with Uncle William and written in uneven letters across the top. William felt his throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "This is beautiful, Archie. I'm going to put it in my office so I can see it every day." The little boy beamed with pride, then scampered back to Harry, chattering excitedly about his other presents. Harry caught William's eye over his son's head, and for a moment, they were just two fathers sharing the joy of making children happy. Later that evening, after the children had finally succumbed to sugar crashes and exhaustion, the adults gathered once more in Diana's favorite sitting room. The Christmas tree lights cast a warm glow over the familiar furniture, and for the first time in days, the atmosphere felt genuinely relaxed. "I have something to say," Harry announced, setting down his brandy and looking directly at his brother. "I want to formally apologize for the interview. Not for leaving, not for protecting my family, but for the way I did it. For the public nature of it, for the hurt it caused you and Catherine and the children." William felt his chest tighten, but not with anger this time, with something that might have been relief. "I also want to apologize," William replied, "for not fighting harder to keep you, for not finding a better way to support you within the system, for letting pride get in the way of love." The brothers looked at each other across the room, and for a moment they were 12 and 10 again, promising each other that nothing would ever come between them. "So what happens now?" Megan asked quietly. "Where do we go from here?" It was Condition Blue that provided the answer, in a way that none of them had expected. William explained the protocol to Harry, the careful screening system that had protected him from manipulation while also preventing genuine communication. "Maybe we need something like that," Harry said thoughtfully. "Not to keep us apart, but to give us structure. A way to communicate that protects everyone involved." They spent the rest of the evening working out the details of what they came to call Condition Gold, a new protocol that would allow for regular, scheduled communication between the brothers while maintaining appropriate boundaries. Video calls with the children twice a month. Monthly conversations between the adults to share family news and coordinate major decisions. Annual visits, alternating between London and California. Most importantly, they established a crisis protocol, a way for either brother to reach the other immediately in case of genuine emergency, with no screening or delays. The system wasn't perfect, and they all knew it wouldn't solve every problem, but it was a start. On their last evening together, William and Harry walked alone through the palace gardens, following paths they had known since childhood. The winter air was crisp and clear, and their breath formed clouds in the moonlight. "Do you think we can really make this work?" Harry asked, his voice uncertain. William considered the question seriously. "I think we can try. I think we owe it to our children, to Mummy's memory, and to each other to try." They stopped at the memorial garden that had been planted in Diana's honor, a quiet space filled with her favorite flowers that bloomed in careful succession throughout the year. Even in winter, there was beauty here, evergreen shrubs, and the promise of spring bulbs sleeping beneath the earth. "She would have wanted us to take care of each other," Harry said quietly. "She would have wanted us to be happy," William corrected. "And maybe for us, taking care of each other is the path to happiness." The goodbye at Heathrow was emotional, but not devastating. The children cried, as children do when fun ends and normal life resumes. The adults were more controlled, but no less affected by the prospect of separation. "This isn't goodbye," Harry said firmly as he hugged his brother. "This is see you later." William nodded, unable to trust his voice. They had found their way back to each other, tentatively and incompletely, but genuinely. The road ahead would not be easy. There were still hurt feelings to navigate, media pressures to manage, and the fundamental differences in their life choices to accommodate. But for the first time in months, William felt hopeful. Condition Blue had served its purpose, protecting him when he needed protection, giving him space when he needed space. But now it was time for something new, something that honored both the need for boundaries and the power of love. As Harry's plane disappeared into the gray January sky, William thought about the drawing that now hung in his office, about scheduled video calls and planned visits, about the slow work of rebuilding trust. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be perfect, but it would be real. And sometimes, William thought as he drove back to Kensington Palace, real was enough.